Today, we are digging into the absolutely wild story of a local Malaysian restaurant that somehow made it all the way to the US NASDAQ. It was a spectacular debut that turned into a total nightmare almost overnight. We're talking about Chicken Clay Pot House, ticker symbol CCHH.
So how on earth does that happen? How does a company's stock, which had just been soaring, suddenly lose more than 80% of its value in a single day? Well, that's the big mystery we're going to solve right here.
Okay, let's set the scene. It all kicked off in October of 2025. CHH goes public on the NASDAQ, and they offer their shares for just $4 a pop. A pretty standard move for a smaller company trying to raise some cash. But what happened next was anything but standard. Right after the IPO, the stock just went ballistic. We're talking a surge of an incredible 240%. The market was absolutely buzzing about it. At its absolute peak, the stock hit $15.39 a share. I mean, think about that. From $4 to over $15 in no time. It was a massive wave of hype for a restaurant brand that, let's be honest, most people in the US had never even heard of.
And then the bottom just completely fell out. On December 12, 2025, the stock didn't just drop, it plummeted. It collapsed 82% in one day. And here's the craziest part. There was no big news. No scandal, no terrible earnings report, nothing. Just a complete and total freefall.
So who is this company at the center of this whole mess? Well, Chicken Clay Pot House, or CCH, started out in Penang, Malaysia. And they had this big dream of listing on the NASDAQ Capital Market, which is a tier of the exchange really designed for these smaller, up-and-coming companies.
Before we get into all the numbers and the crazy stock charts, let's talk about the actual business. I mean, what did they sell? Was the food so good it could justify that initial hype? So their big thing is this 2-in-1 dining experience. It's actually a pretty cool idea. First, you eat chicken that's cooked in this really thick, rich sauce, right out of the clay pot. Then, once you've had some of that, they pour broth into that same pot, and it turns into a hot pot for the rest of your meal. Pretty clever. And they weren't tiny. By the time they went public, they had 32 different outlets. A big part of their pitch was that they were the #1 chicken hot pot brand in Malaysia. Now, you got to remember, chicken hot pot is a very specific, narrow category. So being #1 might not be quite as impressive as it sounds. Okay, this is where things start to get really juicy. Because if you just scratch the surface and look at their financials, you start to see some serious red flags that were there the whole time. You have to ask yourself, how did a company with these numbers get such a sky-high valuation? And here's red flag #1. Just look at their revenue before the IPO. It actually went down by almost 9% from 2023 to 2024. I mean, come on. When you're going public, you're supposed to be in your big growth phase. Showing a revenue drop right before you list, that's a huge warning sign. Oh, but it didn't stop there. The company was also just burning through cash. They had negative free cash flow for 2 years straight leading up to the IPO. And on top of those hard numbers, you had people in Malaysia saying that, the restaurants were often pretty empty. Not exactly what you'd expect from a brand that's about to hit the world stage. Now, for the valuation, this is just wild. We can look at something called the price-to-earnings ratio, or PE. It basically tells you how expensive a stock is compared to its profits. CCH had a PE ratio of over 26. That put it right on par with a global monster like McDonald's and way, way more expensive than a company like Wendy's. The valuation was just completely disconnected from reality. So, we know the fundamentals were shaky at best. But that doesn't fully explain how the price could swing so violently. The real answer lies in how the stock itself was structured for the market. To get this, we need to understand a really important term, low float. All this means is that a company only makes a tiny little sliver of its total shares available for the public to actually trade. And when supply is that tight, things can get crazy. And CCH was the poster child for this. Get this, out of more than 19 million total shares, they only offered about 1.4 million to the public. That created what's called an ultra-thin float, and it basically set the stage for absolute chaos. Someone came up with this analogy, and it is just perfect. Think of those 1.4 million shares as just 10 tables in that small restaurant. A TikTok video goes viral, everyone rushes in trying to get a seat, and they're willing to pay anything, right? the price goes through the roof. But as soon as that hype cools down, the place is empty again and the price crashes back to reality. That's exactly what happened here.
But the story doesn't end with the crash. Now, CCH is facing an even bigger problem, the very real possibility of getting kicked off the NASDAQ for good.
So here's how that works. If your stock trades below $1 for 30 straight business days, NASDAQ sends you a warning letter. CCH's stock fell below $1 on December 16th, so that started the clock. After that, they have 180 days to get their act together, meaning the stock has to trade above $1 for at least 10 days in a row. If they can't do that, they could be delisted.
You know, when you boil it all down, the story of CCH is a really powerful lesson. It sounds amazing to take your local food brand all the way to Wall Street, but staying there is a whole different ballgame, and it really brings up a crucial question for anyone looking at the market. What's more important, a company that makes a great product or a company that makes a great stock? Because as we saw here, they are definitely not always the same thing.